Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Kibi. The 9th Assembly is winding down, and in a couple of months, the 10th Assembly will be in place. Political activities have reached fever pitch, and federal lawmakers and other politicians are in a race to clinch their party's tickets to return to Parliament in 2023. As the 9th Assembly winds down, we had a chat with the director at the African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development, Mr. Otabor, to set the agenda for the 10th Assembly.
There's a project that was envisaged to mobilize a critical mass of progressive legislators in the National Assembly towards supporting bills that we consider to be progressively minded bills, and also to shoot down bills that we believe are not progressive in nature. So the project in itself is about mobilizing that critical mass in the National Assembly. So what you saw us do on the 16th of May was to gather stakeholders and then give a kind of a report on how far we have gone with that bill, especially with the 9th Assembly currently winding down, and then to set the agenda for the 10th Assembly that will come. So it was critically to rub minds with stakeholders, look at the gains so far, and how that robust interaction with the legislators can be further deepened with the new 10th Assembly that is coming.
Now, what are some of these legislations which your organizations have worked with lawmakers to mobilize their support in the passage of these legislations?
We've worked together with them on the Petroleum Industry Act. We've worked together even recently on the Camba Amendment Act. We've also had engagement when it comes to the issue of the National Social Insurance Bill that recently went through public hearing at the National Assembly. We've also engaged them during the Women Gender Bill and all that more recently, and some other bills like that, but these ones really come to mind very easily.
What has been the response of lawmakers to your vision of mobilizing them to support some critical legislations?
It's been very good. Like I said, some of the legislators that we're engaging with also come from what people would term a radical background. So they had that background even before coming into the National Assembly. So I think to a large extent it's not so difficult to rally them around bills that we believe are anti-people or anti-progressive bills. So that their engagement with us has, like I said, been very deep. It's been very robust. What usually would happen is that when we interface, we present to them, especially from the point of view of the civil society, why this particular bill has inimical provisions and what the implications will be going forward. So oftentimes it also involves a real sell to them to understand and appreciate where we are coming from. But I will tell you that once that has been done and everybody is on board, on the same page concerning that particular bill, it's a hands-on thing, and they take it and do their best as possible to make sure that they convince their colleagues, they convince other stakeholders about why this bill should be passed or should not be passed. So I would say that their buy-in in this process has really been very, very good, very, very encouraging.
You mentioned gender bills as some of the legislations that you worked with lawmakers to ensure the passage of these bills. So one would wonder what happened that those bills failed during the constitutional review process.
Well, Linda, I must say that everybody knows that when it came to that gender bill, whilst I will give kudos to our legislators who did their best, but I think that the overall climate in the National Assembly did not really at this time favor those bills. I mean, a bill that even the president's wife, the wife of the vice president, mobilized openly for. You could still see the pattern with which the legislators voted for that bill. So I think it was a case that they did their best, because I will tell you that we had a specific engagement with them, and all of these things were put on the table, but it was just unfortunate that somehow the majority of the legislators were not ready to flow with that bill. It's really unfortunate, but that I would not say is really the fault of our And don't forget that, like I said earlier, we're also trying to build a critical mass. So the mass that we have right now in the Ninth Assembly will not be enough that they on their own can solely determine the outcome of a bill. They also have to build coalitions and build support across the aisle to be able to pass any bill substantially. So, but like I said, these are some of the feedbacks that we're taking. And if you look at the communique, if you go straight to the communique, if you look at the communique, you find out that one of the points that was raised in the communique is to say that by acting when they have gotten there, we're almost reactive. So we're saying that one of the feedback is that before legislators even get into parliament, that there's a need for civil society to identify progressive-minded legislators to see how they can begin to engage with them and mobilize them before they even get into the National Assembly. So that way, the possibility of building a much more critical mass for effect and impact will be more. So part of the mobilization we're doing now is that CSOs all over, especially those who engage in legislative affairs, everybody now has a duty. When it is time for primaries, when it's time for elections, look at those who are putting themselves up for election. Identify those who, through their antecedents, through what they've done in the past, you can say, look, this man is progressive-minded, this man is not, this one is this. And once we identify at that point, we can then begin to have subtle, campaign behind to see that this kind of person gets into the legislature.
Would you say that because we do not have a critical number of women in the National Assembly, and that is responsible for why these gender bills failed during the constitutional review process?
No, I don't think so. I don't subscribe to the fact that it was the number of women that were in the National Assembly. I don't have the statistics to even know that every woman voted in support. Now, what is the extrapolation I want to make here is to say that, Linda, you've discovered that even when it comes to elections, we still find that women don't vote for women. So I don't think that it might be a right extrapolation to assume that even all the women voted for the women bill. But if we leave that as it may, I think that one of the critical missing link in the gender bill was that, to my mind, I think that along the line, it was taken for granted that the arguments were very strong and that the men would easily be assuaged by the arguments and support the bill. But I think that a more extensive engagement, I'm going to tell you something that I won't quote, but it's something that I had privy to. There was a delegation that went to visit one of the major political parties, the chairman of one of the major political parties. And after making all the presentation in terms of the strong points for women and the gender bill and all that, and the chairman of that party was point blank, said, look, I don't support this bill and I would not champion it. Now, if a chairman of a party is already saying that, then you have to ask yourself, then what will the members of that party, and especially the leadership and then the legislators of that party, where would be their allegiance and their thoughts? So I think that the women need to engage more. People have taken me up that how much more can they engage? The wife of the president went to visit them. The wife of the vice president was also there. So what more? But I would tell you that visiting on that day also, just to put that subtle pressure on them was good. But what are all the things that have been done before that day? So I think that this is some of my own personal take on why that gender bill did not pass at this time. Like I always tell them, it's not over. And that's why I was of the view that when eventually they acceded to, I think, 2 of the 5, I was of the view, take the 2, work on that. And the same thing that you also mentioned, which I think the women too should look at, from the point of entry, women should be concerned. They should not wait until the assembly has been formed. Then they are not asking for. You saw what happened to the guaranteed women vote in the assembly, how it was shut down. That also didn't pass. So I keep saying that now when the cycle goes, no concerted effort is done to mobilize women until the next election cycle. So some of us are saying that now this election cycle has gone. From the next day, what are the mechanisms that women groups put in place to begin to educate women, to begin to engage women, to begin to recruit women, and gradually put them in that process towards election. So by the time it's getting to the time to cycle through election, you have a mass of women, but we don't do that. And that's one reason I'm saying that when women just come out at 2 months to the time and you are mobilizing and all of that, you won't gain that traction that you require.
In your communique at the end of the forum on the legislature, it was observed that, or you noted that the legislature still has some issues which has not propelled it to be where it's supposed to be at this time. What are some of these issues? If
you look at the configuration of our system today in the country, in our democracy, the executive arm is very strong and visible. The judiciary, even to a large extent, has been stable. But we drew that conclusion from the fact that over time, even when we've had military interregnum in government, you know that the first thing that suffers is the legislative arm. The executive, whether it's a military president or whatever, is working, is functioning. You have the ministers, you have all that is functioning. The judiciary is functioning. So at most times, it is the legislature that is completely shut out. So we are saying that has not allowed the legislature to have the normal evolutionary learning processes. You know, you are there, you learn. I can tell you that what the 9th Assembly is doing is better than what the 8th Assembly did, because there's a learning process. Of course, we are concerned about the turnover in terms of those who will learn and then they go with them. A new set has to come and then they have to learn. But you cannot also rule out the fact that there are some people who have been there for 8 times, 7 times. So they have institutional memory of what is going on and they're able to communicate that to those who are coming in. So that point in the communique is speaking to the fact that of the 3 arms of government, it will appear that it is the legislative arm that has been least developed in terms of the evolutionary learning that should come with the system and the process.
Now, what can be done to address these challenges?
The first thing we identify that can be done is the deliberateness, the intentional realization that represents a gap. And so if we know that it represents a gap, then the next question is to ask, how can you fill the gap? And I will say that it's not as if nothing has been done or is not being done. For example, it's the legislative arm that has the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. You know, even it's mainly a legislative training institute, and it's a very, very strong and vibrant institute that engages in terms of building the capacity of legislators and all that, which is a very good institution. Now, those are kind of institutions that are in place that over time, the impact will be more felt. So these are the kind of things that needs to be done. Capacity building, not only for legislators, but also for the institution itself, where those who are the bureaucrats or the civil service people that work in the legislature, in the National Assembly, are capacitated in terms of legislative and parliamentary functioning. And once those are done, you know, like somebody noted that even the clerks of the committees, the clerks of the House of Assembly, who are civil servants, who are not politicians, that they are the ones who are actually the engine room of the legislators, of the legislature. So we're saying that if you build the capacity of such, and then you institutionalize processes and systems. Now, when we talk about process and system, we also mean some of the ancillary support systems that undergirds the working of the legislature. For instance, access to information, transparency in dealings, you know, and all of those things. It's good that our legislature is now on live on TV. People can follow the proceedings and all that. So that gives a measure of openness. But we know that it's not just about what you say in the open. For instance, as today, people still complain about having access to information, having access to certain bills and all that. So part of what will build the legislature is that deliberateness and intentionality in building not only the capacity of those who work there, but in strengthening the institutions and the systems and processes that undergirds the work of the legislature. So that will go a long way in trying to bridge the gap that currently exists between the 3 arms of government.
We continue with the interview with the director of the African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development, Mr. Otabor. political parties have almost concluded their primaries for different elective positions, that of the National Assembly. Some of them have already concluded them. And we've observed so far that some serving lawmakers will not be returning back to the 10th Assembly because they have lost at the primaries. So we would likely see a high turnover of lawmakers. Does this worry you?
Linda, to be quite honest, is worry. And I think that this particular 9th to 10th Assembly is almost at the end of the day will represent almost one of the highest rates of turnover that we're going to have. Because already from the feelers of those who are not coming, losing in the primaries, the numbers are already, I think I was looking at a headline the other day, and the figure was scary. And it also tells that even those who have now skipped primaries, there's no guarantee that they will win the real election. So if the number still goes down at the time of the election, you can imagine that it's almost going to be a whole new set of people coming, and then they have to go learn the rope all over again. And it's worrisome, but that's democracy for you. You cannot legislate that they must have automatic tickets and all that. It's worrisome, because if you look at some democracies, one of the things that strengthens legislation is the institutional memory that they have. And you see somebody has been there 30 years, 20 years, 40 years, and all that. You cannot take away that experience, and they are able to now mentor those who are coming in, then those who stay under 10 years. So it gives in itself a level of stability to the systems and the legislative functioning of that happens there. So it's worrisome, but like I said, it's a democracy, and we can't really do anything about it.
Setting the agenda for the 10th Assembly, what would you like to see in the 10th Assembly from lawmakers, from the federal legislature?
I think that two major things and I also like to point you to the communique that came out of our reflective meeting. I think there's the perception that some of the bills that come out of National Assembly are not well positioned to deal with the major and critical issues that the citizens are facing. If you look at some of the bills that are debated and passed at the Assembly, you try to draw the line. Where does this particular bill, how does it affect the well-being of the common man on the street? You find out that you can't really, the convergence is not there. Yes, there are bills that go all, you are setting up institutes, you are setting up university, you are setting all of those things. But if you do an analysis, which are the bills that actually touch at the bottom the lives of the United people? It's not much. And then look at how long it takes for a bill to traverse the National Assembly. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that also stems from the fact that the processes are tedious. I will tell you that there are many bills right now in the National Assembly that has not even gone to first or second reading. And now it's going to, as long as this assembly party, of course, they have to go and introduce. So there's already a backlog. That if the new ones and the old ones get somebody who is interested in pushing it to bring. So it's tedious. It's tedious. Coupled with the fact that those bills, if you truly do the analysis, are they touching? And then something also in our communique that was very strong. There is the retention of benefits. So you find that most times legislators, they go there, they actually get benefits for their constituents, but the constituents don't get to enjoy the benefit. So oftentimes legislators have privileged positions where they are allocated certain positions to fill. How many of such actually get back to the constituents to fill? They just get the allocations, they use their acronym, maybe looks one or two people that are family or whatever, and they fill those positions. So it doesn't get back to them. So they don't have constituency offices where they can regularly interface with their constituents to get a feel of what is actually the issues in their constituents. They don't go there. If you're not relating with your constituents to know exactly what are the issues with them, how are you able to bring it to National Assembly? And that's why I find that most of the time the bills that are sponsored, that goes through the chamber, I keep saying that where is the connection to the well-being of the average citizen that you are representing? So for me, in setting the agenda for the 10th Assembly, those are the two critical elements that I'm hoping that the Assembly would be able, and then maybe to throw this in, they should cut the bureaucracy of the legislation. The bureaucracy is too much, especially when it has to do with the passage of bills. I think the timing can be shorter so that we can have more bills passed, and especially bills that touch the lives of the average person.
President Buhari has assented to the National Health Insurance Bill. The signing of a law is expected to ensure coverage of 83 million poor Nigerians who cannot afford to pay health insurance. The chairman, Senate Committee on Health, Senator Yahaya Oloregbe, recently engaged with journalists to give more details about the new law. President Buhari signed into law the National Health Insurance Bill in May 2022. The law is intended to ensure health coverage for Nigerians. The new legislation repeals the National Health Insurance Scheme Act 2004.
The signing of these bills into law today.
After signing the bill into law, President Buhari promised that his administration will ensure the full implementation of a new act to provide coverage for all Nigerians. He also said the new National Health Insurance Authority will collaborate with the state government health insurance schemes to accredit primary and secondary healthcare facilities and ensure the enrollment of Nigerians. Briefing journalists at the National Assembly days after President Buhari signed the bill, the chairman, Senate Committee on Health, Senator Ibrahim Oloregbe, says the new bill makes health insurance mandatory for all Nigerians. Senator Oloregbe asked Nigerians to disregard reports of a new tax on phone calls to fund healthcare for vulnerable people in the newly signed National Health Insurance Authority bill.
The National Health Insurance Authority we are creating is not a revenue collecting agency of government in line with our Finance Act. On that basis, they cannot accept it. So the bill was returned. So the National Assembly, the Senate first, in December 2021, had to reconsider the bill, recommitted it again, and amended the Section 25. I must say, I saw in the paper and the social media today that the new tax, no, that is not in the past bill. What they are circulating is a wrong version of the bill. It's the version that we passed before in 2020. The new version that is passed, which will be published after it's been gazetted, which is the one signed by the president, has a vulnerable group fund but has no tax attached to it. What it has, which we'll come to back later, is that it provided some 5 sources of funding without the tax. What we passed was a special intervention fund to be appropriated to be allocated by the executive and appropriated by the National Assembly to fund that particular thing. It means it will come from the pool and be allocated.
He says the provision of health care for vulnerable people in the legislation will be funded through allocation by the federal government, Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, Health Insurance Levy, Special Intervention Fund, as well as any investment proceeds, donations and gifts to the authority.
All Nigerians are expected to have an insurance to cover their health. It went on, how would they be able to do that? There are 3 sources to be able to do that. One, we have what we call the basic minimum package of health insurance, which will be provided through either federal government fund or state health fund. That is, every state in Nigeria is expected under Section 13 to also, not that they are mandated, because it's not mandatory, because we have a federal system of government, said me, but there is a provision that will make them attractive to do that. Why? Because already we have the National Health Act, which provided Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, 1% of consolidated revenue of the federal government. And that act has some money, which is like a carrot. But if you want to assess that carrot as a state, this law and the guideline for that provision fund state that you must have a state health insurance authority yourself.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.